Discovered my wife's infidelity with another man at our wedding. Unexpectedly, I left her publicly, humiliating her in front of all the guests. The sun dipped low in the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue over the quaint garden venue. It was the eve of what was supposed to be the happiest day in Jack's life. The final rehearsals had just concluded, and the laughter of friends and family filled the air. Yet, amidst the joyous cacophony, Jack's heart was heavy, burdened with a secret that could shatter the world as he knew it. Jack stood at the edge of the garden, his gaze lost in the distance. In his hand, he held his phone, its screen displaying a message that had become his tormentor. It was a video that revealed Clara, his soon-to-be wife, in the arms of another man. Every time he watched it, a part of him crumbled. He had stumbled upon it accidentally, a cruel twist of fate revealing the betrayal just a week before their wedding. The sound of footsteps approached, and Jack quickly pocketed his phone. It was his best man, Tom, coming to check on him. "You okay, man?" Tom asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You've been off since this afternoon." Jack forced a smile. "Just pre-wedding jitters, you know?" Tom nodded, though his eyes still held a trace of worry. "It's going to be perfect, Jack. Clara's a great woman, and you two are meant for each other." Jack's smile faltered at the mention of Clara's name. If only Tom knew the truth. As the evening wore on, Jack found himself going through the motions. He laughed when it was appropriate, toasted with his friends, but his heart wasn't in it. His mind kept replaying the video, the images seared into his memory. Later that night, as he lay in his bed, the silence of the room felt suffocating. He picked up his phone again, his thumb hovering over the play button of the video. But he didn't need to watch it, the images played on a loop in his mind. Clara's laughter, not with him but with someone else. Her eyes, devoid of the love she professed to him. It was all a lie. Jack thought about confronting Clara when he first found out. But the shock and pain had rendered him motionless, incapable of deciding what to do next. Now, with hours left before he was supposed to stand at the altar and vow his life to her, indecision still plagued him. What hurt Jack the most was not just the betrayal but the years of trust and love he felt he had wasted. Clara was not just his fiancée, she was his confidant, his best friend. How could she fracture their bond so carelessly? And why? The night dragged on, each tick of the clock a reminder of the impending decision. To expose Clara's infidelity in front of their loved ones would be a public spectacle, a scandal that would humiliate her. But could he, in good conscience, marry a woman who had so blatantly betrayed him? As dawn broke, Jack made his choice. He wouldn't go through with the charade of a happy wedding. Today, he would reveal the truth, come what may. It was not the day he had envisioned, but it was the day that needed to happen. For his own sake, for the sake of honesty, the truth had to come out. Jack rose from his bed, a man determined. Today would mark the end of one chapter of his life and the painful beginning of another. The morning of the wedding arrived with a gentle breeze and a sky painted in pastel hues. The garden, adorned with flowers and ribbons, was a vision of beauty and celebration. Guests began to arrive, their faces alight with joy and anticipation. Everyone, it seemed, was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in Jack's heart. Jack stood in a small room adjacent to the garden, his reflection staring back at him from a full-length mirror. He looked every bit the handsome groom in his tailored suit, but his eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. Tom, ever the attentive best man, was fixing Jack's tie, trying to lighten the mood with small talk. "Remember when you first met Clara?" Tom chuckled. "You were so smitten, you couldn't stop talking about her for weeks." Jack's heart ached at the memory. He had met Clara at a mutual friend's party 4 years ago. Her laughter had been infectious, her smile captivating. They had clicked instantly, and what followed was a whirlwind romance filled with love and promises. But now, those memories were tainted, overshadowed by the harsh reality of Clara's betrayal. The video that had surfaced, showing Clara in a compromising position with someone Jack barely knew, had shattered everything he believed about their relationship. Clara had always been the more outgoing one, her social butterfly nature contrasting with Jack's more reserved demeanor. In retrospect, there were signs, moments when Clara's attention seemed elsewhere, her excuses for late nights increasingly flimsy. But Jack, trusting and in love, had brushed away his doubts, attributing them to his own insecurities. As the guests settled in their seats and the ceremony was about to begin, Jack's mind was a battleground. Part of him yearned to run away, to spare himself the impending humiliation. But another part, the part fueled by hurt and betrayal, demanded justice. The music started, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he walked out to take his place at the altar. The garden was a blur, the faces of the guests indistinct. His focus was singular, the path that Clara would soon walk down, towards him, towards their shared facade of a happy future. Tom gave him an encouraging pat on the back before taking his place. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. He could see Clara now, beginning her walk down the aisle, radiant in her wedding dress. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Jack saw the woman he had fallen in love with. But the illusion was fleeting, quickly replaced by the painful truth. As Clara reached the altar, the celebrant began the ceremony. The words were familiar, yet they felt hollow. Jack's gaze shifted to the guests, their faces a mixture of happiness and expectation. They were here to witness a union, unaware that they were about to witness a revelation that would shatter the day's joy. Finally, the moment came for the vows. Clara looked at Jack with love and anticipation. Jack felt a pang of sorrow for what was about to unfold, but he knew there was no turning back. With a steady voice, Jack began, "Before I say my vows, there's something I need to share." He took out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he found the video. The garden was enveloped in a tense silence, every eye on Jack. "This," Jack said, his voice echoing through the space, "is the truth about the woman I was about to marry." As he pressed play, the whispers in the aisle grew to a collective gasp, the beginning of a dramatic unraveling that would change their lives forever. The air in the garden became electric, charged with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. As the video played, a hush fell over the crowd. The footage was undeniable, showing Clara in a passionate embrace with another man. Murmurs rippled through the guests as the reality of what they were witnessing sank in. Clara stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She stared at the screen, then at Jack, her expression a mix of horror and guilt. The man she was with in the video was nowhere to be seen among the guests, his identity a mystery to many but a dagger to Jack's heart. The celebrant, caught off guard, fumbled for words, unsure how to proceed in the face of such an unprecedented situation. Jack, meanwhile, kept his eyes on Clara, looking for any sign of remorse, any hint of the woman he thought he knew. Tom, standing a few steps behind Jack, was equally stunned. He glanced at the guests, many of whom were friends and family members, their faces a canvas of shock, pity, and embarrassment. Jack finally broke the silence. His voice, though calm, carried a weight of betrayal and pain. "I cannot marry you, Clara," he said, his words resounding through the garden. "Not after this." Clara's composure crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out to Jack. "Please, let me explain," she sobbed, her voice barely audible. But Jack stepped back, his decision firm. "There's nothing you can say to change what I've seen, Clara. What we all have seen." The crowd was now a mix of murmurs and whispers, some guests rising from their seats, others looking down in discomfort. The joyous atmosphere had turned into a scene of a broken fairy tale. Clara's parents, seated in the front row, looked on in disbelief. Her mother's hand covered her mouth, her father's face etched with confusion and anger. They had been fond of Jack, seeing him as a son. Now, they were witnesses to their daughter's disgrace. In the midst of the chaos, a young woman, a friend of Clara's, rushed forward. "Stop this madness," she pleaded with Jack. "This isn't the way to handle things." But Jack was unmoved. He had wrestled with his conscience all night, and his resolve had only hardened. This was not just about him and Clara, it was about honesty and the trust that she had shattered. "I loved you, Clara," Jack said, his voice breaking. "I trusted you with all my heart. But you chose to betray that trust, and I can't overlook that." Clara collapsed to her knees, her sobs filling the silence. "I'm sorry, Jack. I never meant to hurt you," she cried, her words doing little to soothe the wound that had been opened. Jack turned away, unable to bear the sight of her despair. He walked past the guests, past the rows of flowers and decorations that had been set up with so much hope and anticipation. He didn't look back, his mind made up. He had come to the wedding to start a new chapter of his life with Clara. Instead, he was leaving alone, leaving behind a relationship that was built on a lie. As Jack disappeared from view, the garden remained in a state of shock. The wedding, once a symbol of love and commitment, had turned into a tableau of betrayal and heartbreak. In the aftermath of Jack's departure, the garden, once a haven of matrimonial bliss, was now a theater of stunned silence and confusion. Clara remained on the ground, her bridal gown sullied by the grass, her cries muffled by her hands covering her face. The guests, unsure of how to react, exchanged awkward glances, whispering among themselves about the scandal that had just unfolded. Tom, torn between his loyalty to Jack and the chaos at hand, hesitated for a moment before moving towards Clara. He knelt beside her, offering a handkerchief and a gentle pat on the back. "Clara, you need to get up," he said softly, his voice laced with sympathy and discomfort. Clara's parents, now at her side, were a mixture of anger and sorrow. Her mother helped her to her feet, whispering words of comfort, while her father stood, his face hardened, looking in the direction Jack had walked away. "What have you done, Clara?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. The guests began to disperse, some offering Clara sympathetic looks, others avoiding eye contact. The celebrant, a kind-faced older man, approached Clara's parents. "I'm terribly sorry," he said, his usual ceremonial demeanor replaced by one of concern. "If there's anything I can do." Clara's mother shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, but I think everyone should just go home." Meanwhile, a few of Clara's closest friends gathered around her, trying to shield her from the murmuring crowd. They were equally shocked, having known Clara as the loving, devoted partner to Jack. The revelation was as much a blow to them as it was to the rest of the guests. As the garden emptied, Clara sat on a nearby bench, her bridesmaids huddled around her. The video, which had played on a loop, was now a distant echo in her mind, each frame a reminder of her indiscretion. "It was a mistake," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "A terrible mistake." One of her bridesmaids, a childhood friend named Emily, took her hand. "Clara, why? Why did you do it?" Clara looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I was scared, confused. I thought I loved Jack, but then I met him, and everything just got so complicated." The sound of the remaining guests leaving filled the air, the joyous music replaced by a solemn stillness. The decorations, the flowers, the seats that had been filled with guests, all stood as silent witnesses to the downfall of what was meant to be Clara's happiest day. Clara's father, after speaking briefly with the remaining family members, turned to Clara. "We'll talk about this at home," he said, his voice stern. Right now, we need to get you out of here. The ride home was a blur for Clara. She stared out of the car window, the world outside moving past in a haze. Her mind replayed Jack's words, his pain, his disappointment. She thought of the love they had shared, the plans they had made, and how, in one impulsive moment, she had destroyed it all. As the car pulled into the driveway of her childhood home, Clara realized the magnitude of what she had lost. Not just Jack, but the trust of those she loved, the respect of her friends and family. The veil had fallen, not just from her face, but from the life she had so carefully constructed, revealing a truth she could no longer hide from. Jack walked alone, the echoes of the day's events reverberating in his mind. He had left the garden and the shattered remains of what was to be his wedding day far behind. The streets were quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos he had just escaped. His steps were aimless, each one taking him further away from a future he once envisioned with Clara. As he walked, Jack's mind played over the events of the day. He remembered the look of shock and hurt on Clara's face as he exposed her betrayal. He thought of the guests, their expressions ranging from disbelief to pity. And then there was Tom, caught in the middle, trying to offer support despite his own confusion. Jack's heart ached with a mixture of emotions, betrayal, sadness, but also a sense of relief. He had loved Clara deeply, and the revelation of her infidelity had been a crushing blow. But exposing the truth, as painful as it was, had lifted a burden off his shoulders. He could not have lived a lie, and despite the public nature of the confrontation, he knew he had made the right decision for himself. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the pavement. Jack found himself at a small park they used to visit together, a place filled with memories of laughter and love. He sat on a familiar bench, looking out at the tranquil scene before him. As he sat, Jack reflected on his relationship with Clara. They had been happy, or so he had thought. Where had it gone wrong? Could he have done anything differently? The questions circled in his mind, but he knew that some things were beyond his control. Clara's actions were her own, and he couldn't blame himself for her choices. The sound of children playing in the distance brought Jack back to the present. He thought about his future, now uncertain and uncharted. The path he had envisioned with Clara was no more, and he was left to forge a new one alone. It was a daunting prospect, but also an opportunity to rediscover himself, to focus on his own needs and aspirations. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out. It was a message from Tom, checking in on him. "You okay, man? Need to talk?" Jack stared at the screen for a moment before typing a reply. "I'm okay. Just need some time to think." He knew the road ahead would be difficult. The fallout from the wedding would be a topic of gossip and speculation. He would have to face questions, both from others and within himself. But for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a sense of clarity. As the sky darkened, Jack stood up from the bench. He took one last look around the park, a place that once held so much meaning. It was time to leave the past behind and look to the future. With a deep breath, Jack started walking again, this time with a direction in mind. He was not sure what the future held, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The journey would be his own, a path of healing, growth, and eventually, hope.